5 on Finniston Farm by Enid Blyton. Continued. Chapter 4. Junior. A big man came into the kitchen, very like the twins to look at. He stooped and seemed tired. He didn't smile, but just nodded. "Trevor, here are the visitors I told you about," said Mrs. Philpot. "Look, this is Julian, and—" "More visitors," said Trevor with a groan. "Good heavens, what a crowd of children! Where's that American boy? I've got a bone to pick with him. He tried to set the tractor going by himself this morning, and—" "Oh, Trevor, never mind about that now. Just wash and come and have your tea," said Mrs. Philpot. "I've kept some of your favourite scones for you." "Don't want any tea," said her husband. "Can't stop except for just one cup, and that I'll take into the dairy. I've got to go and see to the milking. Bob's off today." "We'll help, Dad," said the twins, speaking together as usual, and they got up from the table at once. "No, you sit down," said their mother. "You've been on the go from 7 o'clock this morning. Sit down and finish your tea in peace." "I could do with your help, twins," said their father as he went through the door towards the dairies, "but now your mother's got so many on her hands, she'll need you more than I do." "Mrs. Philpot, let the twins go if they want to," said Julian at once. "We can help, you know. We're used to helping at home." "And what's more, we like it," said Anne. "Do let us, Mrs. Philpot. We'll feel much more at home then. Can't we clear away and wash up and all that while the twins go and help with your milking?" "You let 'em help," shouted old great-granddad suddenly from his corner, making Timmy and Snippet leap to their feet startled. "What are children coming to nowadays, weighted on hand and foot? Pah!" Now, Grandad," said poor Mrs. Philpot, "don't you start worrying. We can manage fine." The old man made a loud, explosive noise and banged his hand down on the arm of his chair. "What I say is this—" But he got no further, for the sound of footsteps could be heard in the hall, coming towards the kitchen, and loud American voices came nearer and nearer. "See here, Pop, I want to come with you. This is a dead and alive place. You take me to London with you. Oh, Pop, go on, do." "That the Americans?" asked Dick, turning to the twins. Their faces had gone as black as thunder. They nodded. In came a burly man, looking rather odd in smart town clothes, and a fat, patsy-faced boy of about 11. The father stood at the door and looked round, rubbing his hands. "Hiya, folks. We've been over to that swell old town and picked up some fine souvenirs. My, they were cheap as dirt. We late for tea? Hello, who are all these folks?" He grinned round at Julian and the others. Julian stood up politely. "We're 4 cousins," he said. "We've come to stay here." "Stay here? Where you going to sleep then?" demanded the boy, pulling up a chair to the table. "This is a one-eyed place, ain't it, Pop? No wash basins, no—" "Shut up," said the twins together, and gave the boy such a glare that Anne stared in astonishment. "Oh, go on, I can say what I like, can't I?" said the boy. "Free country, isn't it? Gee, you should just see America. That's something. Mrs. Philpot, I'll have a bit of that cake. Looks good to me." "Can't you say please?" roared a voice from the corner. That was great-granddad, of course, but the boy took no notice and merely held out his plate while Mrs. Philpot cut him an enormous slice of cake. "I'll have the same as Junior, Mrs. Philpot, ma'am," said the American, and sat down at the table. He held out his plate too. "Say, you should see the things we've bought. We've had a day, haven't we, Junior?" "Sure, Pop," said Junior. "Say, can I have an iced drink? Look-a-here, who's going to drink hot tea on a day like this?" "I'll get you some iced orangeade," said Mrs. Philpot, rising. "Let him get it himself, little varmint. And that was Great-Granddad again, of course, but the twins were already up and on their way to fetch the orangeade themselves. George caught sight of their faces as they passed her and had a shock of surprise. Goodness, how those twins hated that boy. "That old granddaddy of yours must be a bit of a nuisance to you," said the American in a low voice to Mrs. Philpot. "Always butting in, isn't he? Rude old fellow, too." "Now don't you sit there whispering," shouted Grandad. "I can hear every word." Now, Grandad, don't upset yourself," said poor Mrs. Philpot. "You just sit there and have a nap." "No, I'm going out again," said Great-Grandad, heaving himself up. "There's some people that fair make me ill." And out he went, leaning on his stick, a magnificent figure with his head of snow-white hair and his long beard. "Like someone out of the Old Testament," said Anne to Dick. Timmy got up and followed the old man to the door, with Snippet close behind him. Junior saw Timmy at once. "I say, look at that big dog," he said. "Who's he? I've not seen him before. Hey, you come and have a bun." Timmy took not the slightest notice. George addressed Junior in an icy voice. "That's my dog, Timmy. I don't allow anyone to feed him, except myself." "Shucks," said Junior, and threw the cake down on the floor so that it slid to Tim's feet. "That's for you, dog." Timmy looked down at the cake and stood perfectly still. Then he looked at George. "Come here, Timmy," said George, and he walked straight to her. The cake lay on the floor half broken into crumbs. "My dog is not going to eat that," said George. "Better pick it up, hadn't you? It's made a bit of a mess on the floor." "Pick it up yourself," said Junior, helping himself to another bun. My, what a glare you've got. Makes me want my sunglasses, brother." He gave George a sudden sharp dig in the ribs and she gasped. Timmy was beside her in a moment, growling so deeply that Junior slid out of his seat in alarm. "Say, Pop, this dog's fierce," he said. "He made to bite me." "He did not," said George, "but he might bite if you don't do what I said and pick up that bun." Now, said Mrs. Philpot, really distressed. "Leave it. It can be swept up afterwards. Will you have another piece of cake, Mr. Henning?" It really was an embarrassing meal, and Anne longed for it to be over. Junior quietened down considerably when he saw Timmy lying down between his chair and George's, but his father made up for that by talking non-stop about the wonderful things he had bought that day. Everyone was extremely bored. The twins came back with a jug of orangeade, which they placed on the table with 2 glasses in case Mr. Henning wanted some. They then disappeared. "Where have they gone?" demanded Junior, having poured a glass of orangeade straight down his throat in a most remarkable manner. "Gee, that was good." "The twins have gone to help with the milking, I expect," said Mrs. Philpot, looking suddenly very weary. Julian looked at her. She must find all these meals very tiring, he thought, coping with so many people. Junior piped up at once. "I'll go and help with the milking," he said, and slid off his chair. "I'd rather you didn't, Junior," said Mrs. Philpot. "You upset the cows a bit last time, you know." "Oh, gee, that was because I was new to it," said Junior. Julian looked at Mr. Henning, expecting him to forbid Junior to go, but he said nothing. He lighted a cigarette and threw the match down on the floor. George scowled when she saw Junior heading for the door. How dare he go out to the milking against the wishes of his hostess? She murmured a few words to Timmy, and he got up at once and ran to the door, barring it against Junior. "Get out of my way, you," said Junior, stopping. Timmy growled. "Say, call him back, will you?" said Junior, turning round. No one said anything. Mrs. Philpot rose and began to gather things together. It seemed to George as if she had tears in her eyes. No wonder if this is the kind of thing that happened every day. As Timmy stood like a statue in the doorway, giving small threatening growls every now and again, Junior decided to give up. He dearly longed to give the dog a kick, but he didn't dare to. He walked back to his father. "Say, Pop, coming for a walk?" he said. "Let's get out of here." Without a word, father and son walked out of the other door. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. "You go and sit down and have a rest, Mrs. Philpot," said Anne. "We'll do the washing up. We'd love to." "Well, it's really kind of you," said Mrs. Philpot. "I've been on the go all day, and 20 minutes rest will do me good. I'm afraid Junior gets on my nerves. I do hope Timmy won't bite him." "He'll probably give him a nip before long," said George cheerfully, collecting cups and saucers with Anne. "What are you boys going to do? Go to the milking shed?" "Yes, we've milked cows plenty of times," said Dick. "Nice job. I like the smell of cows. See you later, girls. And if that little pest tries any tricks, just give us a call. I'd love to rub his face into that crummy mess on the floor." "I'm just going to sweep it up," said Anne. "See you at supper time." The boys went out whistling. Mrs. Philpot had disappeared. Only George, Anne and Timmy were left, for Snippet had gone out with the Harries. "I rather wish we hadn't come," said George, carrying out a tray to the scullery. "It's an awful lot for Mrs. Philpot to do. Still, if she needs the money—" "Oh, well, we can help, and we'll be out most of the day," said Anne. "We shan't see much of Junior, little beast." "You're wrong, Anne. You'll see far too much of him. It's a good thing Timmy's there. He's the only one that can manage people like Junior." Chapter 5. Evening at the Farm. George and Anne went out to find the others in the milking shed. There were plenty of cows there swishing their tails. The milking was almost finished, and the twins were driving some of the cows back to their field. "Hello, how did you get on?" asked Anne. "Fine, it was fun," said Dick. "My cows did better than Julian's, though. I sang to them all the time, and they loved it." "Ass," said George. "Did you have a talk with the farmer?" "Yes, he's got an old Land Rover, and he'll take us all over the farm tomorrow," said Dick, pleased. "And we can ride on that tractor if Bill, that's one of his farm hands, will let us. He says Bill won't have Junior on the tractor at any price, so maybe there'll be ructions if he sees us on it." "Well, I'm all ready for a ruction, and so is Timmy," said George grimly. "Sooner or later I'm going to tell Junior a few home truths." "We'd all like to do that," said Julian, "but let's hold our horses till a good moment comes. I don't want that nice Mrs. Philpot upset, and you know, if we caused her to lose the 2 Americans, she might suffer badly. In her pocket. I bet they pay well." "Well, I understand all that too, Ju," said George, "but Timmy doesn't. He's longing to have a go at Junior." "And how I share that feeling," said Dick, rubbing Timmy's big head. "What's the time? Shall we all go for a walk?" "No," said Julian. "My legs feel stiff with cycling up so many Dorset hills today. I vote we just stroll around a bit, not go for miles." The 5 set off together, wandering round the farm buildings. They were all very old, some of them falling to pieces. The roofs had great Dorset tiles made of stone, uneven and roughly shaped. They were a lovely grey and were brilliant with lichen and moss. "Aren't they gorgeous?" said George, stopping to look at the tiles on a small outhouse. "Look at that lichen. Did you ever see such a brilliant orange? But what a pity half of them have gone from this roof, and someone has replaced them with horrid, cheap tiles." "Maybe the Philpots sold them," said Julian. "Old tiles like that, brilliant with lichen, can fetch quite a bit of money, especially from Americans." There's many a barn out in America covered with old tiles from this country, moss and all, a bit of old England. If I had a lovely old place like this, I wouldn't sell one single tile or one single bit of moss, said George quite fiercely. Maybe you wouldn't, said Dick, but some would, if they loved their farm enough and didn't want to see it to go to pieces for lack of money. Their fields would be worth more than old tiles to them. I bet old Grandad wouldn't sell them if he could help it, said Anne. I wonder if the American has tried to buy any of these tiles. I guess he has. They had an interesting time wandering around. They found one old barn-like shed stacked with ancient cast-away junk, and Julian rummaged in it with great interest. Look at this giant cartwheel, he said, peering into a dark corner. It's almost as tall as I am. My word, they must have made all their own wheels here in the old days, in this very shed, perhaps, and maybe their own tools too. Look at this old tool. What in the world is it? They gazed at the curious curved tool, still as strong and as good as it had been 2 or 3 centuries before. It was heavy, and Julian thought that he wouldn't have liked to have used it for more than 10 minutes at a time. But I bet old Grandad could use it for a whole day and never get tired, he said. When he was a young man, I mean. He must have been as strong as an ox. Well, you remember what the woman at the dairy said, put in Anne. She said he had once fought a bull and knocked it out. We must ask him about that. I bet he'd love to tell us. He's a real old character, said Julian. I like him, shouts and temper and all. Come on, it's getting late-ish. We didn't ask about the evening meal. I wonder what time we ought to get back for it. 7:30, said George. I asked. We'd better go back now, because we'll have to get ourselves clean, and Anne and I want to help lay the table. Right, back we go, said Julian. Come on, Tim, stop sniffing about that old rubbish. Surely you can't smell anything exciting there. They went back to the farmhouse, and the girls went to wash at the kitchen sink, seeing Mrs. Philpot already preparing for supper. Won't be a minute, called Anne. We'll do those potatoes for you, Mrs. Philpot. I say, what a lovely farm this is. We've been exploring those old sheds. Yes, they need clearing out, said Mrs. Philpot, who looked better for the rest she had had. But old great-grandad, he won't have them touched, says he promised his granddad not to let them go to anyone. But we did sell some of those lovely old grey tiles once, to an American, of course, a friend of Mr. Henning's, and Grandad almost went out of his mind. Shouted day and night, poor old chap, and went about with a pitchfork in his hand all the time, daring any stranger even so much as to walk over the fields. We had such a time with him. Good gracious, said Anne, having a sudden vision of the grand old man stalking about his fields, shouting and waving a great pitchfork. Supper was really a very pleasant meal, for Mr. Henning and Junior didn't come in. There was much talk and laughter at the table, though the twins, as usual, said hardly anything. They puzzled Anne. Why should they be so unfriendly? She smiled at them once or twice, but each time they turned their eyes away. Snippet lay at their feet, and Timmy lay under the table. Great-grandad was not there, nor was Mr. Philpot. They're both making the best of the daylight, said Mrs. Philpot. There's a lot to do on the farm just now. The children enjoyed the meat pie that Mrs. Philpot had baked, and the stewed plums and rich cream that followed. Anne suddenly yawned a very large yawn. "Oh, sorry," she said. "It just came on all of a sudden. I don't know why I feel so sleepy." "You've set me off now," said Dick, and put his hand in front of an even larger yawn. "Well, I don't wonder we feel sleepy. Ju and I set off at dawn this morning, and I know you girls had a jolly long bus ride." "Well, you go to bed, all of you, as early as you like," said Mrs. Philpot. "I expect you'll want to be up bright and early in the morning. The Harries are always up about 6 o'clock. They just will not stay in bed." "And what time does Junior get up?" asked George with a grin. 6 o'clock too? "Oh no, not before 9 o'clock usually," said Mrs. Philpot. "Mr. Henning comes down about 11. He likes his breakfast in bed. So does Junior." "What? You don't mean to say you take breakfast up to the lazy little pest?" said Dick, astounded. "Why don't you go and drag him out by his ankles?" "Well, they are guests and pay well for being here," said Mrs. Philpot. "I'll take Junior his breakfast," said George, much to everyone's astonishment. "Timmy and I together. We'd like to, wouldn't we, Timmy?" Timmy made a most peculiar noise from under the table. "That sounded like a laugh to me," said Dick, "and I'm not surprised. I'd just like to see Junior's face if you and Tim walk in on him with his breakfast." "Do you bet me I won't do it?" demanded George, really on her mettle now. "Yes, I do bet you," said Dick at once. "I bet you my new pocket knife you won't." "Taken," said George. Mrs. Philpot looked puzzled. "No, no, my dears," she said. "I can't have one guest waiting on another, though I must say those stairs are a trial to my legs when I'm carrying up trays." "I'll take up Junior's tray, and Mr. Henning's too, if you like," said George, in a half-kind, half-fierce voice. "Not Mr. Henning's," said Julian, giving George a warning look. "Don't go too far, old thing. Just Junior's tray will be enough." All right," said George, rather sulkily. "Aren't Junior and Mr. Henning coming in to supper?" "Not tonight," said Mrs. Philpot, in a thankful voice. "They're dining at some hotel in Dorchester, I think. I expect they get a bit tired of our simple farmhouse meals. I only hope they won't be too late back. Great-granddad likes to lock up early." The children were really glad when the evening meal was cleared away and washed up, for they all felt heavy with sleep. The good strong air, the exciting day, and the many jobs they had done had really tired them. "Good night, Mrs. Philpot," they said when everything was done. "We're off to bed. Are the twins coming too?" The twins actually condescended to nod. They looked tired out. Julian wondered where Mr. Philpot and old great-granddad were. Still out working, he supposed. He yawned. Well, he was for bed, and even if he had had to sleep on the bare ground that night, he knew he would sleep well. He thought longingly of his camp bed. They went their various ways, the twins and Julian and Dick to the big barn, the girls upstairs to the room opposite Junior's. George peeped into it. It was even untidier than before, and obviously Junior must have been eating nuts up there, for the floor was strewn with shells. They were soon in bed, the girls cuddled together in the big, rather hard old bed, the boys in their separate camp beds. Timmy was on George's feet, and Snippet slept first on one twin's feet and then on the other's. He was always perfectly fair in his favours. A crashing noise awoke the girls about 2 hours later, and they sat upright in bed, alarmed. Timmy began to bark. George crept to the top of the stairs, hearing Grandad's loud voice below, and then crept back to Anne. "It's Mr. Henning and Junior come back," she said. Apparently old Grandad had locked up, and they crashed and banged on the knocker. My, what a to-do! Here comes Junior. And indeed, here Junior did come, stamping up the stairs and singing loudly. "Little pest," said George. "Wait till I take him his breakfast tomorrow." Chapter 6. A little excitement for breakfast. It was fun to sleep in the barn. Dick tried to keep awake for a while and enjoyed the barn smell and the sight of the stairs and the sky seen through the open door where a cool little night breeze came wandering in. Julian fell asleep at once and did not even hear the crashing of the knocker at the front door of the farmhouse when the Hennings came in, or the loud voices. He awoke with a start at about 1 o'clock in the morning and sat straight up in bed, his heart beating fast. What on earth was that noise he had heard? He heard it again and laughed. What an ass I am. It's only an owl. Or maybe more than one. Oh, gosh, what was that high little scream? A mouse or a rat? Perhaps the owls are hunting in here. He lay still and listened. He suddenly felt a rush of cool air over his face and stiffened. That must have been an owl's soft feathered wings. Owl's wings made no noise, he knew. The feathers were so soft that not even a quick-eared mouse could hear an owl swooping silently down. There came another little high-pitched squeak. The owl's doing his job well, thought Julian. What a fine hunting place for him, a barn where foodstuffs are stored, overrun with mice and rats, of course. I bet this owl is worth his weight in gold to the farmer. Well, owl, do your job, but for goodness sake, don't mistake my nose for a mouse. Ah, there you go again, just over my head. I saw you then, a shadow passing by. He fell asleep once more and didn't wake until the sun streamed into the barn, lighting up hundreds of tiny motes floating in the air. Julian looked at his watch. 7:30, and I meant to be up at 7. Dick, wake up. Dick was so sound asleep that he didn't wake even when Julian shook him. He merely rolled over and settled down again. Julian glanced across the barn and saw that the twins' camp beds were empty. They had stacked their pillows and bedclothes in neat piles and disappeared silently out the door. Without waking us, thought Julian, pulling off his socks. I wonder if I can wash at the big kitchen sink. Dick, will you wake up? He said loudly. It might be 10 o'clock for all you care. Dick heard the two shouted words and sat up at once, looking aghast. 10 o'clock? Oh, no! Gosh, I must have slept all round the clock. Oh, I say, I didn't mean to be late for breakfast. Calm down, grinned Julian, brushing his hair. I only said it might be 10 o'clock for all you care. Actually, it's just gone 7:30. Thank goodness for that, said Dick, lying back in bed. Oh, for 10 minutes more. The twins have gone already, said Julian. I wonder if the girls are up. Oh, my goodness, what's that? Something had jabbed him sharply in the back, making him jump violently. Julian swung around, expecting it to be Junior or one of the twins playing a silly joke. Oh, it's you, Nosy the jackdaw, he said, looking at the cheeky bird, now perched on his pillow. You've got a jolly sharp beak. Jack, said the jackdaw, and flew to his shoulder. Julian felt flattered until the jackdaw pecked his ear. Here, you take the bird, he said to the unwary Dick, and handed Nosy to him. Nosy promptly pounced on the watch lying beside Dick's pillow and flew off with it. Dick gave an angry yell. Bring that back, you ass of a bird. Don't you know a watch when you see one? He's taken my watch, Ju. Goodness knows where he'll hide it. He's gone into the roof, said Julian. We'd better tell the twins. Perhaps they can deal with him. Now, why doesn't he take Junior's watch? That would be a trick I should really applaud. Check, 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 said Nosy, exactly as if he had agreed. He had to open his beak to say check, and the watch promptly fell out. It bounced onto a sack far below, and the bird swooped down to get it. Dick also swooped, and as the watch had now slipped between two sacks, he managed to get to it before the jackdaw. Nosy flew up into the roof and chacked angrily. "Don't use such bad language," said Dick severely, strapping on his watch. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself." They went out of the barn and round to the farmhouse. There were sounds of people about, and the two boys felt quite ashamed of being so late. Breakfast was on the table, but already quite a number of people seemed to have had it. "The girls haven't had theirs," said Dick, looking at the places set in front of the chairs where George and Anne had sat the night before. "But the twins have. It looks as if everyone has, except us four, apparently. Ah, here's Mrs. Philpot. Sorry we're late. We overslept, I'm afraid." "That's all right," said Mrs. Philpot, smiling. "I don't expect my visitors to be up early. Anyone can sleep late on a holiday." She held a tray in her hands and set it down on the table. "That's for Mr. Henning. He'll ring when he wants his breakfast. That's Junior's tray over there. I make the coffee when they ring," she said, and went out again. There was cold ham for breakfast, boiled eggs and fruit. The two boys tucked in and looked round reprovingly when the two girls came, with Timmy behind them, still sleepy-eyed. "Overslept, I suppose," said Dick, pretending to be shocked. "Sit down. I'll pour you some coffee." "Where's Junior? Not down yet, I hope," said George anxiously. "I've not forgotten my bet about taking up his breakfast." "I say, do you think it's all right to let George take up Junior's breakfast?" said Julian after a pause. "George, don't throw the tray at him or anything, will you?" "I might," said George, eating a boiled egg. "Anything to get your new pocket knife from you." "Well, don't go too far in teasing Junior," said Julian warningly. "You don't want to make the Henning family walk out and leave Mrs. Philpot high and dry." All right," said George. "Don't nag. I think I'll have another egg, Dick. Pass one over, please. I don't know why I'm so hungry." "Leave a bit of room for this ham," said Dick, who had cut himself 2 good slices. "It's out of this world. Simply too good to be true. I could eat it all day." The two girls tucked into their breakfast, and just as they were finishing, a bell rang very loudly in the kitchen, jangling just above their heads. They jumped violently. Mrs. Philpot came into the room at once. "That's Mr. Henning's bell," she said. "I must make his coffee." "I'll take up his tray," said Anne. "George is going to take up Junior's." "Oh, no, I really don't like you to do that," said Mrs. Philpot, distressed. Just then another bell rang. It jangled to and fro for a very long time. "That's Junior's bell," said Mrs. Philpot. "He always seems to think I'm quite deaf." "Bad-mannered little beast," said Dick, and was pleased to find that Mrs. Philpot didn't disagree. Anne waited till Mr. Henning's tray was ready, and then firmly put her hands to the sides. "I'm going to take it to Mr. Henning," she said, in a most determined voice, and Mrs. Philpot smiled gratefully and let her lift it. "Bedroom on the left of the stairs, 1st floor," she said. "And he likes his curtains pulled too, when his breakfast is brought." "And does Junior like his pulled as well?" inquired George in such a sugary voice that the two boys looked round at her suspiciously. What was she up to now? "Well, I do pull them for him," said Mrs. Philpot. "But don't you pull them if you don't feel like it. Thank you very much, dear." Anne had already gone upstairs with Mr. Henning's tray, and now George set off with Junior's. She winked at Dick. "Get that pocket knife ready for me," she said, and disappeared through the door, grinning wickedly. She went carefully upstairs with Timmy close at her heels, wondering whatever George was doing with the tray. George came to Junior's door. It was shut. She gave it a violent kick, and it flew open. She entered, clattering with her feet, and set the tray down on a table with a jolt that upset the coffee. She went whistling to the windows. and pulled the curtains back across the poles so that they made a loud clattering noise. Junior had apparently fallen asleep again, his head under the clothes. George upset a chair with a crash that made Junior sit up, half scared. "What's going on here?" he began. "Can't you bring my breakfast without—" Then he saw that it was George in the room, not the kindly Mrs. Philpot. "Get out," he said angrily, crashing about like that. "Pull the curtains across again. The sun's too strong. And look how you've spilt the coffee. Why didn't Mrs. Philpot bring my breakfast? She usually does. Here, put the tray on my knees, like she does." George whipped the bedclothes off him, took up the tray and set it violently on his pyjamaed knees. The hot coffee got a violent jerk, and some drops fell onto his bare arm. They were hot, and he yelled loudly. He lashed out at George and hit her hard on the shoulder. That was a very great mistake. Timmy, who was at the door watching, leapt onto the bed at once, growling. He pulled the terrified boy onto the floor and kept him lying there. Standing over him, deep growls coming from the depths of his great body. George took absolutely no notice. She went round the room, humming a little tune, putting this and that straight, tidying the dressing table, not seeming to notice what Timmy was doing. She shut the door so that no one would hear Junior's howls. "George, take this dog off me," begged Junior. "He'll kill me. George, I'll tell my pop of you. I'm sorry I hit you. Oh, do take this dog off me, please do." He began to weep, and George looked scornfully down at him. "You nasty, spoiled little pest," she said. "I've a good mind to leave you here all morning with Timmy on guard, but this time I'll be generous to you. Come here, Tim. Leave that funny little worm there on the floor." Junior was still weeping. He crept into bed and wrapped the blankets round him. "I don't want any breakfast," he wept. "I'll tell Pop about you. He'll lamb you all right." "Yes, you tell him," said George, tucking him in so tightly that he couldn't move. "You tell him, and I'll whisper into Timmy's ear that you've told tales of me, and honestly, I simply don't know what he'll do." "You are the most horrible boy I've ever met," said Junior, knowing when he was beaten. George grinned. So he thought she was a boy, did he? Good. "Mrs. Philpot isn't going to bring up your breakfast any more," she said. "I'm going to, with Timmy, see? And if you dare to ring that bell more than once each morning, you'll be sorry." "I don't want my breakfast brought up," said Junior in a small voice. "I'd rather get up and go downstairs for it. I don't want you to bring it." "Right, I'll tell Mrs. Philpot," said George. "But if you change your mind, just tell me. I'll bring it up any morning with Timmy." She went out and banged the door, Timmy trotting down the stairs in front of her, puzzled but pleased. He didn't like Junior any more than George did. George went into the kitchen. Dick and Julian were still there. "You've lost your bet, Dick," said George. "Pocket knife, please." I not only took up his breakfast and accidentally spilt hot coffee on him, but Timmy here pulled him out of bed and stood over him, growling. What a sight that was! Poor Junior doesn't want his breakfast in bed any more. He's coming down for it each morning. "Good for you, George," said Dick, and slid his pocket knife across the table. "You deserve to win. Now sit down and finish your breakfast, and mind, I'm not betting anything else for a long, long time." Chapter 7. The twins changed their minds. The twins, Harry and Harriet, had had their breakfast some while ago. They now came into the kitchen, Snippet at their heels, and scowled to see the five still having breakfast there. Anne was in fits of laughter over George's account of the way she had dealt with Junior. "You should have seen his face when I plonked the breakfast tray on his knees and the hot coffee splashed him," said George. "He let out a yell that startled even old Timmy, and when he hit me and Timmy leapt on the bed and dragged him out onto the floor, his eyes nearly fell out of his head." "No wonder he's decided to come down to breakfast each morning then," said Julian. "He'll be scared stiff of you appearing with a breakfast tray again." The twins listened to this in amazement. They looked at one another and nodded. Then they walked up to the breakfast table, and for once, in a way, only one twin spoke. Whether it was Harry or Harriet, nobody knew, for they both looked so much alike. "What's happened?" said the twin to George. "Why did you take up Junior's breakfast tray?" "Because we were all so fed up with the way Junior and his pop impose on your mother," said George. "Fancy a boy having breakfast in bed." So old George took it into her head to take up his breakfast herself, and said she'd teach him such a lesson he'd be a bit more considerate of your mother in future, said Dick. "What's more, I was idiotic enough to bet George she wouldn't do it, and now she's won my best pocket knife off me. Look." George proudly displayed the knife. The twins each gave a sudden, loud laugh which surprised the others very much. "Well, I'm blessed," said Dick. "Fancy you two being able to laugh. You always look so fierce and unfriendly. Well, now that you've condescended to talk to us, let me tell you this. We think your mother is absolutely tops, and far from giving her more trouble, we're all going to help as much as we can. Got that?" Both twins were smiling broadly now. They took it in turns to speak, which was really much more friendly than their usual stiff way of talking in unison. "We hate Junior," said one twin. "He thinks our mother is a kind of slave to come when he rings for her or shouts for her." "His father's the same," said the other twin, "wanting this and that and sending our mother all over the place to fetch and carry for him. Why doesn't he go and stay at a hotel?" "He doesn't because he's so set on snooping out our old things and buying them," said the other twin. "I know for a fact that Mother has sold him some of her own things, but she just had to have some money. Things are so expensive and we grow out of our clothes so quickly." "I say, it is nice to hear you talking properly," said Julian, clapping the twin on the back. "And now, would you mind letting us know how to tell which of you is which? I know one's a boy and one's a girl, but you both look exactly alike to me. You might be two boys." The twins gave sudden mischievous grins. "Well, don't you tell Junior, Yen," said one. "You can always tell me by the scar on my hand, see? Harriet hasn't any scar." "I'm Harry." The four looked at the long, thin scar on the back of the boy's hand. "I got that by tearing the back of my hand on barbed wire," said Harry. "Now you'll know us from each other." "I say, tell us all about George and the breakfast tray from beginning to end. Good old George. She just looks just as much like a boy as Harriet does." It was very pleasant to find the twins so friendly after their stiff, sullen dislike. The four warmed to them, and when Mrs. Philpot suddenly appeared in the kitchen to clear away breakfast, she was astounded to see her twins talking and laughing gaily with the others. She stood and stared, a delighted smile on her face. "Mother, Junior's not going to have breakfast in bed any more," said Harry. "Listen why," and the story had to be told all over again. George went red. She was half afraid that Mrs. Philpot would be really displeased. But no, she threw back her head and laughed. Oh, that really does me good, she said. But I hope Junior doesn't tell his father, and they don't both go off in a hurry. We do need their money, you know, much as I hate having them here. Now I must clear away their breakfast. No, you mustn't. That's our job, said Anne. Isn't it, twins? Yes, said both twins together. We're all friends now, Mother. Let them belong to the family. Well, I'll go and see to the chickens then, if you're going to clear away, said Mrs. Philpot. You can wash up too, bless you. Look, how would you like to go round the farm in our old Land Rover today, said Harry to the others. It's the best way to see over the farm. I think Bill's got to go round this morning and check on the fields and the stock. He'll take you if I ask him. Fine, said Julian. What time? In about half an hour, said Harry. I'll find Bill, and when you hear a horn hooting, come on out. By the way, Bill isn't much of a talker, but if he takes to you, he'll be quite pally. Right, said Julian. Can Dick and I do something while the girls are clearing away? Gosh, yes, there's always something to do on a farm, said Harry. Come on up to the chicken houses. Harriet and I are patching them up to stop the rain leaking in. Julian and Dick, with Timmy behind them, immediately went off with the twins. Now as merry and friendly as before, they had been dour and sullen. What a change! Well, thank goodness I took Junior's breakfast up to him and put him in his place, said George, folding up the tablecloth. It was apparently just the one thing that would make the twins friendly. Hark, Anne, I believe that's Junior coming. She slipped behind the dresser while Anne set the chairs straight round the table. Junior came creeping in very quietly indeed and looked round fearfully. He seemed very relieved to find only Anne there. He considered that she was quite harmless. "Where's that dog?" he asked. "What dog?" said Anne innocently. "Snippet?" "No, that great ugly mongrel, and that awful boy he belongs to," said Junior, still fearful. "Oh, you mean George, I suppose," said Anne, amused that Junior thought George was a boy. "Well, look over there." Junior saw George advancing on him from behind the dresser, gave one agonized yell and fled, fearing that she had Timmy somewhere behind her. George laughed. "We shan't have much trouble with him in future," she said. "I just hope he doesn't say too much to his pop." After a while they heard the sound of a hooter outside. "That's the Land Rover," said George, excited. "Well, we've just finished the washing up. Hang up the tea cloths to dry, Anne. I'll pop these dishes into the cupboard." Soon they were out of the great kitchen door and down the passage that led to the yard. Not far off was a van-like car, the Land Rover. It was an old one, very dirty and a bit lopsided. Dick and Julian yelled to the girls, "Buck up! Didn't you hear us hooting?" The girls ran to the Land Rover. Bill the farmhand was at the wheel. He grinned at them and nodded. Timmy greeted George as if he hadn't seen her for a year and almost knocked her down in his playfulness. "Tim, don't be such an ass," said George, planting your great muddy paws all over me. "Where are the twins? Aren't they coming?" "No," said Bill. "They be busy." They all got in and were just about to set off when someone else appeared. "Wait! I'm coming! Wait, I say!" And up ran Junior, full of himself as usual. "Jump down, Tim. Go to him," said George in a low voice, and very willingly indeed Timmy leapt down and ran full tilt towards the unsuspecting Junior. He gave one loud yell, turned, and fled for his life. "Well, that's got rid of him," said Dick with much satisfaction. "Look at Timmy, he's laughing all over his hairy old face. You love a joke, don't you, Tim?" It did indeed look as if Tim was laughing, for he had his mouth wide open, showing all his teeth, and his tongue was hanging out happily. He leapt back into the car. "Sensible dog, that," said Bill, and then relapsed into his usual silence as he started up the Land Rover with a really shattering noise. It moved off towards the fields. How it jolted! The four clung to the sides of the van, almost bumped off their seats as the Land Rover jerked its way over fields, paths, uphill and downhill, jolting in and out of deep ruts, appearing to be on the point of overturning at any minute. Anne wasn't sure that she liked it much, but the others enjoyed every minute. "Now you'll see the farmland," said Bill, as they came to the top of the hill. "Look yonder. Could be the finest farm in the country if Mr. Philpot had the money."